distinguished Roberta is a distinguished art historian and award-winning author of many articles and books, including Audubon's Aviary, the original watercolors for the birds of America, and Audubon as Artist, a new look at the birds of America. Roberta received her PhD from Princeton University, and she is curator of drawings at New York Historical Society. I think without any further ado, Roberta, I'm going to let you take over. We're going to ask everyone to please mute and also to hold questions to the end. Just jot your ideas or questions or thoughts down, but we'll wait until the end of the program. And Roberta, I think it's time to share screen and we'll go from there.
That's great. Thank you so much, Sandy, for your, Donna, for your introduction, and Sandy and everyone else. Evan, I'm delighted to be with you, and I'm going to try to get my screen up because we've had a little technical thing going here today. And you tell me if it's good. Is it good? Hello?
We can see your screen.
Oh, good. Excellent.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm delighted to be with you tonight, and I want to congratulate everyone in the Montclair Bird Club for your 105th anniversary. I think that's terrific. And if you bear with me tonight, I'd like to take you on a migration to discover some of the secrets behind Audubon's magical images and shed some light on misinformation about the man. And we will explore what I call my roost for the past 24 years, where I had all 435 watercolor models for the 435 plates of the birds of America under my wing, so to speak, at the New York Historical. In 1863, the museum purchased these national treasures from the artist's widow, Lucy Bakewell, preventing their migration to the British Museum, which is a real possibility. And before swooping into our discussion, I presume, in fact, from the last discussion, I know you're all avid birders, but I wonder how many of you have prints of Audubon's birds or his quadrupeds. And I remember, I'd like to take you there, but I can't. The first time I saw Audubon's watercolors without the glass, bird under glass, I was absolutely transfixed, just like when you watch birds, because they are dazzling and unforgettable. And working with them, which I've had the privilege to do with many exhibitions, including 9 called Audubon's Aviaries, during that time, visitors always asked me, was Audubon more of an artist or a naturalist? And I want to ask you that question when we come to the Q&A. So please keep that in mind and come up with some really interesting ideas. And in order to appreciate his works, remember that he did not have Merlin, okay? And he only had his field observations as visuals and prints from books, usually in black and white. In the vast literature on the artist naturalist, who was America's first great watercolorist, and by the way, a gifted nature writer, if you really want to read some good prose on observing birds, his art has been ignored, overshadowed by his dramatic life and his contributions to natural history, although he stated that naturalists should know art, just as Raphael should know anatomy. So this blending of art and science. Now, my recent book addresses this terra incognita, that is Audubon's relationship with other artists and his debt to them, relying as much as possible on his extensive correspondence and publication. And I'm going to give you a quick preview of this. And this sleuthing allowed me to reconstruct his self-education. He was autodidactic, and address some of the recent charges leveled against him. Unlike most people, Audubon did not find his vocation until after he was 40 years old. And like Leonardo da Vinci, who likewise married art and science, and who also, like Audubon, was illegitimate, Audubon was a brilliant innovator and a creative entrepreneur, albeit a charismatic but difficult personality. And Audubon was more than an illustrator of birds and more than an artist who depicted the natural world, because his works convey the rapturous sense of wonder he experienced when observing avian life, and embed us belly down in the swamp with him observing the birds. But let's start what was there before Audubon? And you can see on the screen here that we have Catesby, who was the earliest, and then down below Alexander Wilson, the father of American ornithology. And you can see the number of species that they actually depicted in their treatises versus Audubon at the bottom. And you know that Catesby also equally featured plants, botanicals, and you can see from Alexander Wilson that he actually combined species, something that Audubon said, this is not going to happen, because he believed that every species should have its own plate, as though you were observing that particular bird. One of Audubon's greatest achievements was representing for the first time in history all of his birds life size. The others represented, not Catesby, but Wilson, represented in Selby in England, represented the smaller birds life size, but the bigger ones they couldn't because they didn't have large paper. Audubon used double elephant folio paper, which was, shall we say, invented in the mid-18th century, but was only available after 1800. He also did something you can see in the three examples I have here. Look at the eyes of the birds. You can see that there's a pie-shaped white reserve of the paper. He left that so that, and that's very difficult to do, by the way, so that it looks like the birds are looking out at us, as they do. They're engaging us. And it was this kind of incredible insight on how to make you become involved with these illustrations that sort of reach out to us and make us pay attention. Like all of us, Audubon was full of contradictions. He was sensitive, he was depressive, he was emotional, he was reactionary and artistic. So before we explore his birds, let's take a gander at his life and walk on the wild side a bit. Audubon was born on the island of Saint-Domingue, today's Haiti, to a former French naval sea captain and one of his mistresses, Jean Robin. Therefore, he was a bastard, an illegitimate natural child, a fact that haunted him his entire life. We're going to do a little psychohistory here. But perhaps it also was a force driving his ambition. In fact, like so many things in life, he made lemonade out of lemons. His illegitimacy conferred on him the stigma of being damned by the Catholic Church and gave him an inability to inherit his father's property under the French law, and he was his father's only son. It made him feel like an outsider and an outcast. Some of you might know that recently his genealogy has been questioned, but I answered those questions by researching documents in the French archives and discovering an unpublished letter held by his descendants to prove incontrovertibly the identity of his mother, who died when he was a few months old. And if any of you would like to read that, it was published in the Bulletin of Harvard's Museum of Comparative Zoology. I'd be more than happy to send you a PDF. In 1788, when he was 3, his father sent him to France under the pseudonym Maison Neuve, meaning new house, okay, to hide his illegitimacy. And it was really only the first of 10 names that he had to use into adulthood, which added to his identity problems. And Audubon's early life, like that of his father Jean, was turbulent and played out against the background of 3 revolutions. The first was a Haitian Revolution, a revolt by enslaved people against French colonial rule, which ended in 1804 with the colony's independence. Number 2, the Second Revolution, which is not where Audubon lived from the time he was 3, was brutal. They didn't just get him, they changed him with barges, and then sunk barges in the Loire River. Nice. No wonder the youth became a truant dreamer who wandered from school into the countryside, initiating his incurable passion for nature. He began drawing what he called the feathered tribes, writing, "None but the aerial companions suited my fancy. My father pointed out their elegant movements, the beauty and softness of their plumage." He roamed what is now called the Marais Audubon, that is home to thousands of birds, more than 230 species. And I would highly recommend that you take a bird watching trip there in summer. It's absolutely spectacular. In 1796, he began serving as an apprentice at the Naval Academy in La Rochelle, like his father and his grandfather. Of course, he wanted him to be going to the Navy, but he got seasick. And he was also an academic failure. He flunked all these hydrography courses and math courses, and he also ran away. So it was there with 2 years. He probably learned craftsmanship, but he was in something called garniture, which is what we're going to be drafting on how to decorate ships and build things. Afterwards, he was homeschooled, and he loved music, he loved geography, he loved drawing, he loved classics, but he hated math. In 2011, fast forward, a docent friend Audubon drawings to America. Well, there hadn't been anything published. I didn't know of any, but I searched and searched, and I found this one still in his descendants' possession. You can see it's dated 1803. It was done at the Roberta, his family's country home, and you can see that it's a European goldfinch. It's in stiff profile, like its prototype Buffon in white, probably from his father's copy of Buffon, but you can see he's also enlivened looking at a bird. And you can see pastel and pastel. And when at the time, most ornithological illustrations were colored with watercolors. Audubon tells us in his writings that he adopted this out-of-fashion pastel to approximate the softness of others. And this was the beginning of the kind of synesthesia we see in his masterpieces, which is why he takes us there observing birds. That year, 1803, Audubon's father sent the unmotivated teenager to America, ostensibly to oversee his Mill Grove property outside of Philadelphia, which he had purchased in 1789, believing that America was the land of promise. And this introduces the third revolution, the American Revolution, in which Captain Audubon fought on the American side against the British, including at the Battle of Yorktown, and was actually imprisoned in New York City for a very long time. At Mill Grove in today's Audubon, Pennsylvania, which isn't about 90 miles as it flies from and I recommend a visit there if you haven't been there. He met Lucy Bakewell, the love of his life. Pragmatic, and we know opposites attract. And it was a true love match. And he never betrayed her, even though he was a notorious flirt and he loved and adored intelligent women. In America, Audubon continued working with friable pastels. You can see that on the screen. Writing in his later essay, My Style, and this is humorous. In America, I began myself to the drawing of a specimen hung by a string by 1 foot with a desire to show their every portion. He doesn't spell very well, by the way. In this manner, I made some pretty fair signboards for poulterers, in other words, selling poultry. In these poignant works, the birds are as dead as doormats, but Audubon wished to reanimate them with the string. So the bodies turn, so he could reanimate them, but he could also study their anatomy. Notice too, with the 38-inch barn owl, that Audubon was already working with life-size representations. The visual inspiration for this unique method, no one else used it, was hunting trophy paintings. Here, an example on the right of Jean-Baptiste Audry, who would influence him throughout his career. In March 1805, Audubon returned to France, taking his hung by the string pastels to show family physician and family friend, Dr. d'Orbigny, an amateur naturalist who helped Audubon become more scientific by drawing specimens and also live birds. And on the left, we see one of those drawn birds in France. And you can see the outline, faint outline of the branches. When he got back to, before he left to go back to the United States, he copied many of them. So you can see one of the copies on the right. All those copies are in Harvard Library. And you can see he filled in the branch, and he also colored the berries, but the bird isn't quite as animated. While studying with D'Orbigny, he started to add settings and to portray both sexes with their plumages, such as the cardinals on the left, and sparking his eventual goal to show the life story of each species. Moreover, he added other creatures. If you look at the hoopoe, which is one of my favorite birds, you can see there is a butterfly down below, and if you look at its beak, it is captured a little tiny insect. You see it? And also look at its crest. It seems to move. It's fanned it out. In May of 1806, Audubon returned to America. July 3rd, 1812, he granted him citizenship. He was an immigrant. Okay? He lists Saint-Domingue as his birthplace, although his father had obtained his earliest passport which lists his birthplace as Louisiana to cover up his illegitimacy. So people have now claimed that it was Audubon who said he was born in Louisiana, when actually it was his father that did it, and Audubon has suffered this slander. A word of caution about Audubon. As one scholar has claimed, he had the faultiest memory in the world. He had no memory for dates or names, or he did for places, sort of, but not totally. But he had a great visual memory, especially for birds. On his return in 1886, he immediately visited the Field Museum, which combined art and science. It was his paradise. Note the displays in the long room, which you see in two versions of the screen. It contained taxidermy specimens at the left, not as in Europe against painted blank backgrounds, but rather with settings and frames painted by Field's daughter, Sophonisba and Grasola. And nearby were portraits of people. And please remember that bald eagle that you see at the end of the green arrows on the left. With this grouping on the screen, we see how quickly Audubon developed and introduced watercolor in what will become his multimedia productions, defying the senses. Starting at the upper left with Buffon's pair, we don't know why they are perching on the tree. There's no reason. But if you go directly below with Audubon's early pastel, you can see the bird has a mind. He's focusing on the ants. Then at the center, his pair, notice it's a pair, pursue an inchworm, which with the magic of watercolor, look at the detail, he renders with all its translucency while capturing its incredible manner of inching along. And it actually seems to move before your very eyes. All of his observations above the species find reflection at the far right of his model for the plate of the Olson. These birds are sentient beings in state of becoming, as in Baroque art, as though if you blinked, they'd fly off the page and a branch would be bare. This is Audubon's secret sauce that no other aviary illustrator has ever equaled. In 1806, he married Lucy, having become a businessman with a store on the frontier town of Louisville. 2 years later, while leading a double life drawing birds, Alexander Wilson, the father of American ornithology, walked into his store. And this is a seminal moment about which we could talk for hours, believe you me. But long story short, contrary to what detractors have said, Wilson noted in passages preserved from his lost diary that the two met several times when Audubon showed him drawings of two new birds he had never seen before, although Wilson considered Audubon merchant, if not an ornithologist. Also, the visual evidence before you on the screen contradicts what detractors
your stories in book form or something like that. Have you, Vera, have you ever thought of publishing them in some form, or no, you just write for yourself?
What? Is someone talking to me? Okay, shall I continue? I was gonna analyze what you see on your screen. If you look, you will see that on the left is Audubon's early red-winged blackbird. And Wilson must have seen this. You see his print in the middle. And Audubon's is flat. Notice that the birds both have their tongues extended. Wilson improved upon Audubon's male and included a female on the lower one, and you can see his coverts are actually better on the male, but he combined it with another species. In 1828, when Audubon reworked his 1822 watercolor of the three top birds on the right, notice he critiques Wilson's flat silhouette, and enlivening his more three-dimensional male with electric blue pastel, which I think you can see, and omitting the telltale tongue. Not satisfied with those three birds, and in London, without a specimen to consult, he honored his credo, which was drawn from nature by consulting Wilson, which is considered the next best thing to nature. He used Wilson's female as a model for a Laura Huguenot. His watercolor, therefore, embodies the complex homage to and competition with Wilson, in which Audubon was, and shows the life cycle of the red-winged. In the panic of 1819, Audubon's store and mill went bankrupt, and he became an itinerant bread and butter portraitist. It was the first time that his art sustained him financially, which was important, paving the way for the birds, which he financed all on his own. He learned that profile portraits do not have the psychological and physical depth of three-quarter views, and he would apply that lesson to his birds, realizing that, like humans, each one has specific characteristics, something that had escaped ornithological illustrators before this time. And you know with field study, and you know from your observations, that no two birds really have the same plumage and the same identical markings. Desperately seeking a living in art, in 1820, he and his family moved to Cincinnati, which was one of the earliest centers of scientific activity in the Midwest, with a rich and diverse environment that would redirect his career. He worked studying animals and the birds and birds and painting diorama backdrops in the Western Museum. He also taught drawing, and I discovered that he used fine art prints of classical sculptures as models for his students. And this was the exciting smoking gun, proving that he taught himself the study of prints after works of art. Although the founder of the museum gave Audubon his first exhibition, Watercolors, which received high praise, by the way, in the press, and also suggested in a public talk that Audubon should complete Wilson's documentation of birds in the Mississippi Library, he couldn't pay his salary. So Audubon was smart. After less than a year, he kissed his family goodbye with Joseph Mason, one of his pupils, and in his employ, boarded the flatboat. And if you look at a green arrow there, you can see a flatboat. And he headed for the cosmopolitan melting pot of New Orleans, 3-month birding expedition down the Ohio and Mississippi rivers. As always, he took with him 2 books, one Turton's translation of Linnaeus for taxonomy and Lafontaine's Fables, which helped him become a great storyteller. He also began his Mississippi River Journal with 3 surviving journals out of 50 or so. Audubon intended this journal to travel to share with his family, in which he reports the weather, landscapes, and birds, among them the bald eagle, which he divided erroneously. Remember, ornithology was in a fledgling state. He divided into the white-headed and the brown-headed species of sea eagles, and of course, one of the brown-headed will be a juvenile. He named the brown-headed eagle, later identified as a juvenile, as a new species, excuse me, the bird of Washington. And the species was still and debated in the 1830s and 40s, but you have to read my book to understand that this controversy is alive and well today. Remember Peale's specimen? You can see the actual stuffed specimen here on the lower section. Wilson actually was the one who caught the bird. Peale mounted it. And then at the far right was the image I told you to remember from Peale's painting that shows it installed in the museum. Notice how different Audubon's is for either Wilson or Wilson's specimen. Notice there isn't a fish under the talons like there was in Peale's museum. There's a goose. And notice too that he has the tail up, and it's really quite different. Both Audubon and Wilson were actually in Peale's museum studying the actual specimen at one time. Then when he went to London to engrave things, he later reworked over a pastel on the right with watercolor. And again, you can see how it's clarified. He clarifies, he says, no, I don't want that goose, it's too muzzy. So he puts a fish under his talons, but the fish is not just any fish, it is a catfish that he actually caught and did a lost watercolor of. He studied from life. Audubon's time in New Orleans, we have to have some nudes here because we've been doing birds, but his time in New Orleans was among the most rewarding to reconstruct because people have ignored it. And while he was in New Orleans, he tried to become an artist because the Crescent City, which was a hothouse, multilingual environment in which he jump-started his career, had little of natural history, but a lot about art. And he realized that he was really smart, so he sought out the art community and soon supported himself through portraiture, copying works of art, and teaching art, music, and dancing. Among the artists he knew and copied was John Vanderlyn, who was exhibiting paintings, including his scandalous Ariadne, which you see at the left. The first large-scale nude exhibited in the US, where images of nude women were only borrowings. He was commissioned to paint a copy of Ariadne's head, which is lost, but I believe Vanderlyn's painting is linked to a famous mysterious incident, which you may know about, called Affair Incognito. Always in need of money, he was approached in the street by a mysterious veiled woman, a self-styled artist, beautiful female, said, asked him to draw her full likeness in the nude. That's pretty titillating. Each day she corrected his drawing, and when it was finished, inscribed both their names on it, gave him a kiss, and an expensive rifle worth several $1,000s in today's money. He mentions her in his journal as Mrs. Andre, but in a 23-page letter to Lucy with a narrative enclosure, he describes the titillating 10 encounters with a fair incognito and reveals himself as a gifted raconteur. This commission may have been intended as an erotic present for the sitter's lover, like the drawing by Pinelli on the screen, whose sitter wears a necklace with a heart in it. How many of you seen A Graceful Heron Waiting? Audubon was blown away by the exotic birds he encountered in New Orleans. Audubon observed great blues, but the particular specimen he used for this, he and Mason found in a market. They combed the markets for birds to study, such as this one. Note that he depicted the waiter in a feeding position to fit onto the paper and kept improving the image with pentimentian when feather. You see the green arrow. He put the paper over. He didn't like that feather, but the pentimento is coming through. And notice that he painted the grass in the front over one of the legs, the back leg, to make it appear like you were more, you are there quality embedded in the swamp, observing the bird feeding. Notice we are worm's eye level looking at it. And notice too on the right, these wonderful details, how he has this dry brush that creates the illusion of the filminess of feathers, and how he does layer upon layer, sometimes 10 to 15 layers. In need of money and wanting to draw wild birds, Audubon accepted a tutoring position at the Peary Plantation, where he and Mason roamed the countryside, rich in wildlife from June to October 1821. Today, it's the Audubon Historical Office. Of course, I'm going to recommend that you take a trip or visit. Working with Mason, and by the way, I should say that this is his room I shared with Mason. Sparrow narrow there. But if you go to the right on the ground floor, there's a door, this door right to the left, and that is their chamber. Working with Mason, the first of his 4 artistic collaborators, Audubon initially outlined the composition, including the botanicals, then painted the birds, after which Mason painted the plants, such as the magnificent magnolia on the left. Nevertheless, Audubon was also very talented as a Yea, New Jersey State Bird. And this modus operandi saved him a lot of time. It was also in the position of international workshops, which still flourishes today. Just think of Jeff Koons and the army who produced his works. It was his position board, really, that enabled Audubon to stage his pre-cinematic tableaus based on decades of observation to make them so vivid. He could construct it anywhere from board, wire, and pins, and you can see the reconstruction on the left, which also shows you the 3 stages that we'll talk about. Notice it's scored with a grid for transfer, and he could also add to his watercolors as he found the specimens. For example, the male wood duck that you see there was added 4 years after the 2 courting wood ducks at the top of the composition. Audubon considered the device was his invention, although related devices were used by earlier artists such as Durer for enlarging and foreshortening. This tableau shows the love season of the wood ducks, and it's really a complex narrative, as we have seen, like 2 frames of a film with the courting ritual up above and down below the result of the courting ritual. The male is actually collaged on, and you can see that he cut it out from another piece of paper and pasted it on, and then painted the nest. And if you look at the composition and analyze it, it's not just the 2 scenes, but notice how the circles run throughout: the eyes of the birds, the log where the nest is, the motion of the birds themselves, and then the nuts from the sycamore tree. But there's more to it. There's more to it, and there frequently is. Audubon was obsessed with the cycle of nature, the idea of life, death, and rebirth. And you can see the desiccated leaves, and then you see the nuts of the sycamore, just as you see the next generation in the eggs of the wood duck. His device enabled him to represent an osprey, which he observed, by the way, in Egg Harbor, New Jersey, in the exact manner I have witnessed it over 3 times. And you know that the Audubon, National Audubon Society just circulated as one of their best videos of 2024, a wonderful video of an osprey in the exact same posture. However, notice Audubon's is not from the ground, but from the sky on the wing. And how many of you have seen a similar scene from the ground? But he actually invented cameras before cameras. And you can almost hear the sound of the wings as the wing catches the sug of the air. And if you look also at the wing in the back, it's vertical. And this is one of the unique traits of the species. Here we see these details that are just amazing with the talons and the scales on the feet. And notice too the foreshortened wing you can see underneath, and you can see those white dashes. That's again reserve of the paper. No watercolor, no pastel, nothing. Always inventive. In the green heron, he juxtaposes a wary, wise parent. Notice underneath the camouflaging vegetation with the reckless, exposed adolescent going after that Luna moth. And notice the leaf, the red arrow, points it out. It's actually been cut on 3 sides, okay? And the adult was actually painted on a separate sheet of paper, cut out, collaged on, and then he put down the flap of the leaf on top, enriching the scene and really giving a 3-dimensional effect, which you don't get in the prints. You only get it in the watercolors. We know that he copied in an unlocated watercolor a print after Trumbull's Death of Montgomery, but no one has realized its importance. And let me tell you, Ecclesiastes was wrong. There are new things under the sun if you just look, if you're curious, if you look, and because you're birders, you know that. This pivotal experience encouraged him towards more ambitious compositions, such as the Baroque covey of bobwhites, scattering with high decibel excitement from their huddle when attacked by an inept juvenile hawk. This is worthy of the Game of Thrones, I think. Proving its inspiration was Trumbull. Audubon wrote in 1826 that invited to dine at the Mortons' estate outside of Edinburgh. Lord Morton begs Mr. Audubon will bring a portfolio of his drawings of birds with him, and he requests to see particularly the hawks killing game and the death of General Montgomery. This detail had escaped all previous scholars. Following in the footsteps of George Ord, the keeper of Wilson's flame, who had a pathological hatred of Audubon, a newly minted ornithologist has accused Audubon of plagiarism, without understanding how naturalists or artists work or the tradition of artistic appropriation that dates back from the time of Michelangelo. Even Catesby, if you look at Catesby blatantly copied fish, birds from other people and put them into his treatise, etched them in and colored them. As Picasso asserted, good artists copy and great artists steal. The ornithologist has accused Audubon of copying Wilson's great horned owl, but I asked him, how many wings can you note all the differences, the subtleties of the modeling, and the distinct individuals, the 2 sexes Audubon shows and their respective sizes, and note that forward, frontal one that Wilson actually depicted. And also note that Wilson combines the species where Audubon's has Aristotelian unity of time, place, and action. And I'll tell you, I have the best great horned owl story that involves Merlin that I will tell you during the Q&A if you would like to hear it. Then when in England preparing his Mississippi kite for engraving without access to a specimen, he remained true to his credo, drawn from nature, by consulting Wilson for the species. Since the male and female look alike, he took Wilson's male and flipped it for the female. In his ornithological biography, The Text for the Birds, he cites Wilson's plate and source, not only for the image, but also for the taxonomy. And he does this consistently for all the birds. Similarly, he deemed the 2 fighting northern flickers at the top of the page that you see on the left, because he had started with 2, lacked mirth and gaiety. And again in London, he added a strip at the lower part, I think you can see that, and consulted Wilson in a way that showcases his humor. And my goodness, people haven't talked about it, but he was really had a very wonderful sense of humor. And in a sense, he shows what he's quoting his mentors. He takes the male at the lower right from Wilson, you can see that, but he doesn't just take the male. Then he said it lacks mirth and gaiety. So he takes the male again and he puts it to the right of the tree trunk and he puts a worm in its mouth. Okay, changes it slightly, but then that's not enough. If you look at the crook of the tree up above at the U, he's got the male again with just the eye using Wilson. He uses Wilson 3 times. And it's supposed to be amusing. It is amusing if you understand it. And everybody at that time would have known he was using Wilson. What's really amazing and strange is the critical ornithologist gives Audubon a free pass on this. He doesn't even accuse him of plagiarizing. But he lambasts Audubon in another place for plagiarizing himself, which is really common artistic practice and also naturalistic practice, and is considered self-referencing. This avian pas de deux, which Buffon's chase depiction you see at the upper right, and Audubon's later Key West quail dove below it, depicts the species' courting behavior of billing and regurgitating food. However, this representation of the love season is in a different league from the other two. It is as though we had stepped into the love nest to witness a couple in flagrante. The highly eroticized image results not only from the posture of the male with its spread tail and the sensuosity of the feathers modeled in pastel, but also from the popular works of art co-starring the winged god Cupid and his paramour Psyche, images which were widely circulated in prints. In New York, Audubon dissected passenger pigeons, and from the rice in their stomachs correctly calculated that they flew 1 mile a minute, or 60 miles per hour. Alas, as he predicted, actually, once so numerous, the last bird died in 1914 in the Cincinnati Zoo, and you all know her name was Martha, and that she is now a stuffed specimen in the Smithsonian. What do you think was Audubon's prototype for the Carolina parakeet? He writes that a pandemonium of parakeets reminded him of a patterned carpet, and indeed it does. His S-curve composition features 7 birds, the female at the top, which he noted was spreading her unusual 14 tail feathers. With true synesthesia, we can almost hear the birds squawking. They're like, the parakeets we have around, the green parakeets. And the cockleburs rustling, and you feel the softness of their feathers and the layers of them. They're like stills in a movie. I mean, it's like an animation before animation, and are overlaid with thousands of graphite lines defining every roughness and barb, sparkle when the light catches them, like the veins and the shafts of feathers in true light. And if you tip the paper, you can see it. The lowest bird is also just about to fly off into our space. In 1920, the only parrot native to the US was sighted for the final time. Without a recording of its calls and film footage, it lives only in Audubon's watercolor. In 1820, Audubon had dedicated himself to his Birds of America project, but unable to find a US publisher, in 1826, he sailed from New Orleans to Liverpool for 2 months. It was terrible. They were in the doldrums for over 6 weeks. These 2 self-portraits revealed his intense character. The one on the right depicts him as the American woodsman on the model of Nettie Bumppo, the role he created for himself to market the birds. Although humorous, it is really funny. This is how he dressed when, as toast of the time, he was invited to 7-course dinners and asked to share cheekbones and drink far too much, only to rise before dawn to draw birds. Although originally planning to find a London engraver, Audubon instead went to Edinburgh, then the intellectual capital of Great Britain, where he met all the major figures in the natural history scene, including Darwin, and engaged William von Lazars to etch the first 10 plates of the birds. After a strike by colorists, Audubon left London, where he located a cheaper source for his paper and his copper plates, as well as finding a master printmaker, Robert Havell, and his son, Robert Havell Jr., charged much less. The elder Havell soon retired, and his son proved to be Audubon's ideal collaborator on the birds, an enterprise that Audubon financed without any financial support and or patron. And here you have the preparatory watercolor model on the left. In the middle is the copper plate, which was covered with zinc by Dodge to preserve it. It originally would have been a copper color. And on the right is the hand-colored Havel plate. It was colored by professional colorists who were women who were paid not very much, excuse me, for the task. Audubon organized his magnum opus, not in the traditional manner by taxonomy or phylogenetic order. Think of 25 sparrows, 40 gulls, 20 ducks in a row, but according to his aesthetic judgment and which watercolor for engraving. I believe that this organic order resembled how birds appear to us in nature when we're observing them. It's chance. Arguably, it was much more interesting for his subscribers who received prints in fascicles, that is, groups of 5, usually 1 large, 1 medium, and 3 small. And this was a brilliant decision as a marketer. It offered something for everyone and allowing the outliers that were discovered in the West to be added later. How many of you have seen Audubon's Aviary? There were 3 called Complete Flock in 2015 through 18. Remember that The Birds of America was not a book. It was a folio edition of prints, and subscribers could either bind them or not bind them. Sometimes they were bound in 4 volumes, sometimes in 5, and some people just left them in folios. As a student of art, Audubon appreciated Van Schaik's achievement, connecting scientific exactitude with a narrative, thereby segueing from illustration to a work of art. Although the interaction among Audubon's birds reflect species behaviors. And you see Schaik on the left, he actually went so far in his naturalism that he used actual butterflies or scales from butterfly wings and actually collaged them onto his pigment. So this really affected Audubon. On the right, you can see the Northern Mockingbird, which is amongst his most controversial works and was criticized both in Edinburgh and in Philadelphia. Now, if you look closely, evil is hidden, okay? The rattlesnake is hidden in the mockingbird nest, but it is actually based on a drawing of a rattlesnake that's lost that he made at the Peary Plantation, Oakley. And he was criticized because the fangs are decurved. And in fact, several years before he actually drew it, John Knox had published a treatise saying this is possible, that rattlesnakes can rotate their fangs so that they're decurved. He was also criticized for the rattlesnake climbing a tree. And we know that some snakes do climb trees, and rattlesnakes can climb trees. And in fact, a photo of a rattlesnake in a tree, which you might have seen, I did, won the photography contest published in the 2022 issue of National Wildlife, vindicating Audubon once and for all. In London, Audubon attempted without success to paint in oil. He had this idea that it was a higher level, and he admired Sir Thomas Lawrence, who you see on the left, and he brought rare portraits. 2 became friends and exchanged visits, which Audubon described as fascinating. During one, Audubon probably saw the unfinished painting on the right and was struck by how much it resembled his own efforts, that is, outlining in graphite and then going on to paint. While he never became adept in painting in oil, his study of Lawrence's paintings taught him things he adapted to his increasingly complex studies and tableaus, and also his multimedia. If you look at this snowy aigrette, you can see it's absolutely incredible. It'll come back again, and we'll talk about what's going on there. Okay. Lawrence had been influenced by Anthony Van Dyck, another artist who Audubon admired, writing that the livery of the ivory-billed woodpecker always reminded him of Van Dyck. And whenever he spotted one, he said, "There goes a Van Dyck." While the jury is still out about the species' fate, it is probable its haunting cry has been silenced forever, other than in an old photograph and a black and white film with an actual recording from the 1930s. The ivory-billed woodpecker lives only in Audubon's vignette, whose subtle modeling lines included lines made with a stylus. You see that on the right. That's not graphite or charcoal or chalk. That's actually a stylus is impressed into the paper itself. And I should say something about my terrible imitation of the ivory-billed woodpecker. When you read Audubon's ornithological biography, he actually gives you, we don't have Merlin, he didn't have Merlin, he actually gives you the phonetic equivalent of the bird calls. Now here is the yellow-breasted chat. Audubon was eidetic. He was eidetic. That is, he had more than a photographic memory. He had this primitive sense of being able to remember what he saw visually. He actually had it in video as well. And this particular watercolor on the left was criticized by many people in England, and it's criticized by his engraver, Havel. They said that bird and the butterfly according pose could never happen in nature. And usually Audubon didn't cave to criticism, but he did, because you see on the right in the Havel print, he did not include that bird. However, photography has vindicated him, and indeed, that is one of the positions of the courting ritual for the yellow-breasted chat. On the left is his finest oil painting, which underlines what he learned from the French artist Audrey, who was a kindred spirit. Similarly, one sees in this comparison how each artist studied his model from life, although both birds are striding forward. But only Audubon's is filled with physical and psychological tension, and it's the psychological attention that's important. Look at the back foot. It's like a clock spring. It's coiling up, and it's about to spring and push him off. And if you look at the bird's eye, he's looking directly at you with his right eye. His left eye, however, is looking down at that hunter who's right below the hill. And you know that when you blink, that bird is going to go off to the right and you will not see it again. Both of these theatrical scenes have similarly cropped settings. Audubon's drama features a pair-bonded couple defending their union against an interloper. Note the parallel postures that reinforce the partnership. No doubt Audrey's unprecedented image was a suggestion for Audubon's composition, which has baffled people. Why just the head? For subtlety, Audubon turned the stag's head on its side and eliminated its antlers because they would detract from the carrion-loving vultures. In England, Audubon was also influenced by Anglo-Chinese watercolors, but the most bizarre link of Audubon to Asian art is in the Marchioness of Hertford's Chinese drawing room. She was a subscriber to the birds. She got out 28 birds from 10 plates and collaged them where she felt that the hand-painted wallpaper was lacking. Another Asian stimulus were the life-size birds on Whatman paper by Indian artists commissioned by Sir Elijah and Mary Impey and brought back to London. Definitive proof that Audubon knew them is found in a copy of the Greater Adjutant Stork on the right, which came to the NYH with the Audubon watercolors from Lucy in 1863, where it was attributed to Audubon. Needless to say, when I found the watercolor on the left, I changed the attribution and corrected it. Now for the moment you have all anticipated. Although Audubon was self-taught, he claimed that the neoclassical painter Jacques-Louis David was his master, and indeed he was, as Audubon admired his works, which he probably first knew through prints. Clearly for the Golden Eagle, he used David's portrait of Napoleon as his model. And actually that particular painting was in New Jersey. It was in Bordentown at Point Breeze. His dependence on prototypes is one reason why Audubon's images are so compelling. They have layers that lend them a profundity and a resonance. Although we could spend an hour discussing this watercolor, let's see what else lies below its surface. Audubon revered Rembrandt, here quoting via a print his abduction of Ganymede, knowing that he carried the Fables of La Fontaine and frequently quoted from it during COVID. I reread the Fables and identified passages that inspired several of Audubon's watercolors, including the Golden Eagle. And if you look at the watercolor on the left, way at the lower left corner, you will see that there's a precipice, a log over the precipice, and then there's Audubon as the American woodsman in his buckskin, and he has the mate of the eagle over his back. He's bagged the raptor's mate, so that when the eagle with the hawk returns to the mate, there is no mate and in the nest. Just like the eagle's eggs are destroyed in the La Fontaine fable. There's great irony in this, and much like the fabulous tales that La Fontaine and Aesop told. In 1828, after naturalist William Swainson and his wife rescued Audubon from a bout of depression, the trio decamped for Paris. Upon arrival, Swainson went to study at the Jardin des Plantes, whereas Audubon, of course, went to the Louvre, visiting it many times during the sojourn. Among the artists he met in Paris was the botanical artist Redrawn, nicknamed Raphael the Flowers. Redrawn and Audubon exchanged several visits, became great friends, and also exchanged plates of their respective ambitious projects. But you'll have to read the book to find out all of that. And I want to show this seaside sparrow because, as you will see in the inscriptions, it was painted in Great Egg Harbor. You will also see that he kept changing as taxonomy changed, the taxonomy of the birds. He would first do it in graphite, and you can see traces of that below. And then he would go over it again and again. You can see in different in colors of ink as more information was gleaned. To help viewers empathize with the mortally injured great black-backed gull, Audubon based his composition on a religious scene, the deposition of Christ, and may also have had in mind David's death of Merah. And with these allusions to tragic death, his depiction oozes gravitas, even though he thought this bird was a marauder because it killed baby birds or snatched them away from birds to take them for its own. Despite his lack of rigor on dates and specifics, Audubon was a perfectionist, although he realized that perfection is impossible to attain. Look at this progression. When he was his first great egret, with these wonderful egrets, the breeding plumage, which, by the way, were called the white badge of courage because they were harvested for ladies' hats during the Gilded Age in the late 19th and early 20th century. He has looked at people. He realized that if you have a large white bird, what you do is you put a nocturnal background to make it pop. But he didn't like that. And so in the 1830s, when he was thinking about doing his plate, he says, no, I have to have more natural history credentials. I have to show it doing something in its natural habitat. So he puts it with its favorite food, crayfish, the crayfish chimneys, but he never finished the watercolor. He kept the bird preening its feathers to show the way the vertebrae go in the neck, but he changed it completely with the background. But he wasn't satisfied. He did a third version, which you see on the right. And in this case, he keeps the crayfish chimney, but he has the bird walking, and the bird is actually in the plate going towards the prey. He's in a feeding posture, walking ahead. But if you look at the left, he wasn't satisfied with number 3. Look at the white outline of the head. He didn't like the way the eye was done. He didn't like the way the neck was modeled. And he actually, on a separate sheet of paper, redid the head and collaged it on before Havel engraved it. So presently, in the 1830s, when he did this, Audubon worried about the plume hunters already, decimating the species while nesting in colonies. He talks about it a long time. We know that the great egrets and other species were saved from extinction by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1918. But again, this is another story told in the book. And I did a wonderful exhibition, I don't know if any of you saw it, called Fashion and the Fight for Wildlife in 2018. I talked about the fancy for feathers that we were just referring to. Let's go to Audubon's artistic legacy. It could fill a separate volume, but let's consider a few examples. Here, Walter Lord on the right, Audubon used a battle scene, but this time General Wolfe as his prototype instead of General Montgomery, plus Audubon's parakeet. Another example is Winslow Homer's oil painting, which, like Audubon's Golden Eye, assumes the point of view over a gun barrel. They're hunters' views. Tellingly, Audubon, Lawrence, and Redrawn, as well as Homer, were self-taught, and Homer was also a brilliant watercolorist. Finally, there is the Audubon Mural Project, which took inspiration from Audubon. And I wonder how many of you have seen it on the Upper West Side of Manhattan in New York City. It commissions artists with diverse styles to paint murals of birds imperiled by climate change. And to date, 182 species and counting have been painted to embellish more than 120 buildings in Washington Heights. It's worth a whole trip just to see these. They're absolutely fantastic. And the latest one is a huge long wall like a scroll that is epic. The project has now spread to cities across the United States and California, and it's also spread to France. The book's final chapter examines Audubon's role as a proto-conservationist and his desire to found a National Museum of Natural History to conserve wildlife 28 years before the American Museum of Natural History. As you know, the Cornell Lab of Ornithology claims that since 1970, over 3 billion birds have been lost. That is 1 in 4 birds in North America. But we all know there is hope, and success stories like the bald eagle and the bird glass at the Javits Center, which decreased by 90% the number of birds killed by impacting reflective glass. Because Audubon's pre-cinematic images have the potential of movement, his birds are alive and seem about to fly off the page. Just think of the vision it took before Merlin, before a phone, before cinema, before any moving pictures, just like Leonardo to paint the smile on the Mona Lisa before anyone dreamed of cinema or video, to paint the Carolina wren in a tenor stance so that you can almost hear its distinctive calls. What makes Audubon's images so compelling is that, like all great art, we can return to them again and again and learn something new about ourselves as well as about birds. And following in the footsteps of his curiosity, which is the key to greatness and discovery. Well, I think this is enough honking, hooting, chirping, and crowing by me. And I hope that we have redrawn Audubon's together artistic journey of passionate discovery and hard work as his art continues, like the wren, to sing about the beauty of nature. Now to the question, was Audubon more of a naturalist or an artist? The more I study him, the more I believe the scales tip toward the artistic.
You're a good boy.
Because science morphs constantly with new discoveries, while art, like fine wine, only gets better with time. But I'd like to hear what you think. So thank you very much, and I look forward to chatting with you. Do you have any questions? I hope you do.
I'm on mute.
That was excellent, Roberta. Thank you so much. Questions, everyone?
Do you want to hear my story about the great horned owl?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
You want to stop sharing now so we can see all the people at once?
Yeah, I will. Are we good?
Yep.
Yes.
Whoops. Okay, I'm going to close it down. There, that's great. So about 3 weeks ago, I thought my husband was snoring. He woke me up about 3 o'clock, I thought. And then I looked over at him and he was quiet. I thought, well, what is this? And I heard this noise and I thought, oh my gosh, what is this? It really sounds like an owl. I wonder what it was. This is out in Sagaponack and Long Island. And we have screech owls and we have barn owls. And so I had no idea. So I thought, oh, I'll get Merlin out. I got Merlin out. And then I heard another strange sound. And I thought, what is this? I put on Merlin and it said great horned owl. All right. And then the second call came and it said juvenile hungry. Okay. And then there was a third one and it was the mother. And they were talking to each other between 3 and 3:30. And I couldn't put it down. And then the most incredible thing was, and I don't know if you know about this feature, but I discovered the next day that another thing about Merlin, that it pinpointed on my property and in my wilding where I found the sounds. Did you know you could do that? It actually shows you geographically and where that sound came from. It's so incredible. But the horrible thing is I got a new iPhone I had an old iPhone that was 10 years old. Its audio is much better because when I walk out and the birds that I know on my new iPhone, they don't register and I know what birds I'm hearing. Whereas if I have my old phone, which luckily I've kept, it will keep it will identify the calls that I know. So it's very frustrating. Has anyone else had that problem? No?
I'm not a good user of Merlin because there are several at once and I don't know, it doesn't seem to identify anything for me. So I must be doing something wrong, yes.
How new is your iPhone?
The iPhone is new.
That's the problem. Okay, because my new iPhone is just terrible. Only if the bird is right in front of me will it do it. My old iPhone would pick things up way far away.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so I'm very curious about this, and I'm ready to ask. If it were summer, I would contact Cornell because I'm really, really upset.
Actually,
my newer
iPhone also doesn't always pick up stuff that I hear.
Really?
Right
so what can we do about this? This is citizen science. Pardon me?
It has to do probably with the build of the microphone.
That's what I think. And it's really upsetting. Did you keep your old one?
No, I haven't. I mean, I've only used Merlin with my new phone, but I know that it has this problem.
You do. Oh, thank you for that. That's really terrible. Does anyone have an Android that doesn't have this problem? No?
I have a similar experience. My wife snores. but she sounds like a longer.
But she's not on Merlin. Okay.
I didn't have to go to Merlin. She sounds exactly like a long-eared owl.
Love it.
I haven't had any issues with the Android, but I haven't seen it pinpoint locations at all.
Yes, it does. I mean, and you have to go through different, functions to get there. So what you should do is go on to Google and say, how do I find the locations on Merlin? And hopefully you'll get it, because I found it accidentally. And that's what happens so much with what I say with phones, with the internet, with anything that has to do with it. Is so much is accident, or that you're cruising through things and you stumble on something and then you have to reconstruct your path. How did I get there? Because it's, discovery, but many times it's an accident. But so is birding. I mean, it's an accident that we have painted bunting.
I keep finding new buttons in my car.
That's dangerous.
Yeah, we do too.
I hope when you're not driving. Okay.
When I'm driving, I don't know which button I've hit.
That's
when I stop,
Sounds familiar.
no, it amazes me because I was in the technology field, and I believe there is more programming in my phone and in my camera than my company wrote in 25 years.
I bet. I'm sure. I know. It's amazing, and it's all, a size that we cannot see. It's sub-visual. It is amazing where it's taken us. And that's why I think when you look at something like Audubon, you have to turn the clock back. You have to think, why was he so revolutionary? What was he doing? How was he able to make those birds move? And how did he stumble on the fact, which, we have animation, we have Walt Disney, we have Fantasia, but he did all by himself what Walt Disney would do and animators would do in the 20th century. But he did it all by himself. But you have to sort of put yourself back, turn back the clock, erase everything, tabula rasa, to be able to really appreciate what he did.
How do you feel about the woman who cut up all the images and put them on her wall?
Oh, the Marchioness of Hereford. They're still there. You can go to Leeds, and it's a wonderful Elizabethan house. She was actually the mistress of George IV when he was the Prince Regent, and the wallpaper was a present to her. It was given to her mother, and she didn't put it up. She eventually married someone else, and when she redecorated the house is when she cut up the Audubons. I know, but what it was the best advertisement because it reached all the people he wanted for his subscribers. And we didn't talk about it, but the way to sell large books, and Audubon's, by the way, since we didn't talk about it, was 20 inches by 27. And I said book, I should have said prints, sorry. But there were also large books, was by subscription. And he had to market himself, and he had his subscription book, all but 2 pages of which are in the NYH now. And he lists all the people, and then if they would die or cancel subscriptions, he would cross them out with an annotation. But he had to pay for the whole thing himself. So by the Marchioness of Hereford having some of his birds cut out, I mean, just think of going to a cocktail party or going to dinner, and after dinner going to the drawing room, the Chinese drawing room, and seeing these and being able to say, oh, yes, there's the northern flicker, or there's the Florida scrub jay. That would be incredible. He liked it, in fact. He wrote to Lucy and said that, of course, shall we say, teller of tall tales, he exaggerated, and she said that it was the whole of the wallpaper was illuminated with his birds. He loved it. He thought it was great.
I was in that room and I didn't know.
Oh, you were?
Yes, we did. When we were in London, they had a train that took you to different excursions.
Yeah.
And we went, and there was a lovely one that took us out to Leeds Castle.
Oh, how fabulous.
And we saw the room and I said, oh, gee, this is wonderful. I had no idea that those were Audubon's birds. So thank you.
Yes. Oh, no. Isn't that amazing? Yeah, it's a great place. It's beautiful, Elizabethan place. Yeah, it's gorgeous. And it was actually Bess, a woman who was responsible for keeping it that way. Yeah, great. Anybody else have any ideas?
Well,
I'm sure you have lots of things percolating.
Yeah, I'm kind of fascinated by the fact, I never thought of someone marketing himself. I've seen the finished works. I've seen the book collections at the Beinecke Library at Yale, and seeing the full-size prints, and they would turn one each day.
Right, right.
But I never thought about the marketing. And so did he arrange a lot of interviews in newspapers?
He did everything. He did advertisements. And I should say that it's really interesting, for part of his early career, he and Lucy both taught. She was a governess, and she earned a lot of the money that enabled him to go to England. He took $19,000 to England that she had basically earned as a governess. But both of them advertised in American papers for teaching. He drawing, French, dancing, because he was a dance master as well as a teacher of fencing. But then when he went to England, he marketed himself, and he began in Liverpool at the Royal Institution. And many of the watercolors actually have tack holes, because he would have exhibitions and he would charge for them. First, they were free, but then he charged 25 pence for people to go. And they were reviewed in the newspaper. He did this in Manchester. He did this in Edinburgh. His first actual exhibition was in Cincinnati. He also had an exhibition in New Orleans. And then he had these ones all over Great Britain. He also did private shows to wealthy people that were patrons that were going to sign up for him. And he also did this in Paris to scientific organizations. In Edinburgh, he did lectures as well to the Wagnerian Society, to the Royal Society, and he was appointed a member to both. He was also, along with Benjamin Franklin, one of the only 2 Americans made a member of the Royal Society of London, which was a real distinguished achievement. He also showed them there. In Paris, he showed them not to the king. He had to go through someone to do that. But he did show them to the scientific community. So he was, and in Paris, he also showed the plates, the Havel plates, because he felt that those showed him as a success. They weren't just the watercolors, okay, which got rave reviews all over England. They were the actual plates to show that he could indeed produce this magnum opus that was so incredible. And it was an amazing achievement in printmaking, because I don't know, I didn't show you one, but if you looked at a black and white image before the color was added, it's in all nuances of gray, because Havel was an incredible master printmaker. He was equal to Audubon. They were like 2 oxen pulling a cart, equal masters. He used aquatint, which is a very difficult technique that actually is resin that is melted on the plate, which gives the watery feeling of watercolor. And he used it together with etching, which is done on the copper plate with acid. You bathe the plate in acid. And then if you wanted to be some part of it to be bit deeper because the ink is kept in the grooves, you would put wax over everything that you didn't want to bite again. And sometimes he would do that 10 times. And sometimes you could also scrape out. And then he also did some dry point and some engraving. So they were amazing. And they were done in such a way, I don't know how Havel did it, so that they would have the exact tonal values without color that Audubon's watercolors had. And then they had this ingenious system, part of this sort of it's almost like a factory, but it's really, you have to think of it as a studio, a bottega, a workshop production, where he did pattern proofs. And Catesby actually, and Wilson would have these two pattern proofs where you would color and approve the color, and Audubon would annotate if someone else had done the pattern proof, make this brown darker, make this green lighter. And then the colorists would use that. And there are about 78 of those left of Audubon. And they're quite wonderful. The Historical Society has 11 of them. And there was a show at Herschel and Adler about 20 years ago of what was known of those. But anyway, they would follow those. But he took his subscription list in the United States all over too. He took it to the House of Representatives. They signed up. He took it to the president. He signed up. He took it to Harvard. They signed up. So he was doing what I like to call road shows constantly. And his last show of the Birds of America was quite something. When he came back, he had Havel ship the copper plates and the preparatory watercolors for the plates back, and Havel mounted them on gray card because they were very fragile. Audubon took notes on the back of his watercolors, and the notes that he took on the back of his watercolors he used when he wrote the ornithological biography, because it would record the measurements of the birds. And I'm going to come back to that, but let me tell you about the last show. It was in 1839 at the New York Lyceum. He couldn't get them all in. Okay, so he did most of them, and there is a very rare catalog of that show. And again, he charged for it. But about the ornithological biography, which actually makes wonderful reading, and if you read the wood ducks, and if you read the parakeets, there are passages in them that are exactly like the watercolors. I mean, what he observed in nature. He takes his observations from his journals, from his notes on the back of the watercolors, because he would dissect the species. He didn't just have one bird. Sometimes he did with the Connecticut warbler. He never saw the Connecticut warbler until he shot it. He only heard it, which is why the calls are so important. And remember, ornithologists today still harvest birds for ornithology. He did it. Shall we say, during the Labrador trip, he began, as his dementia set in, to really not like to harvest birds and to kill his beloved birds. But he did harvest many of them. He always wanted the most characteristic and wonderful example of the species. He's always looked for them. He would dissect many of them. And in the ornithological biography, I read every single page of the 5 volumes. They're wonderful. Not only does he cite Wilson and Selby and Aldo-Rondini, everybody for taxonomy all the way back, but he gives you the measurements of the feet, of the wings, what the wing spread is, how tall the body is, and he tells you what the bird ate. He also takes whatever interesting anatomical oddities or characteristics that he thinks are important and describes those. It's really quite wonderful reading. And it tells us something. Yes, it's very dated, and that's why I say his art, in a sense, is more lasting, because science is always progressing. It's always, whenever you discover something or publish something in science, it's old hat. It's something new has come over. It's always new. But he really tried to get things right. He just wasn't a very systematic, organized person. He thought with the left side of his brain, and he was a truly artistic personality, but he tried to observe everything. He tried to give people the knowledge that no one had furnished them with before, because they weren't in the field. He was out in the field in the fledgling state of American ornithology. And I've mishmashed a lot of stuff together here. But there's so much to learn about. Did I answer your question
Fascinating.
about
Yeah,
the showing?
yeah,
But
really fascinating.
he
Yeah.
would talk if you were in the same room with him, you probably wouldn't get out if you were interested in inside of 3 hours. I mean, you'd be there for a long time because he had so much pent up to say. And he was always, I think curiosity is the thing. He was always curious until the dementia started getting to him in the late 1830s.
Really interesting.
Yeah, it's like you've answered the questions.
Pardon me?
It looks like you've answered the questions.
Yeah,
I don't know.
The question is, who loves the topic more, you or Audubon himself when he was doing it?
Well, I think it's discovery, and I've been dealing with Catesby recently and other people. I don't just deal with Audubon. One of my really exciting things was a discovery of albums of 16th century birds that had originally been cataloged as 18th century birds. They were dated from 1530 to 1580. And they were the beginning of it was a long 15-year slog, the beginning of Europeans trying to assign taxonomy to birds. It started with a manuscript in Greek, Latin, French, and German, and then it morphed into 4 copies of every bird that they sent to all the people in their correspondence, because the original ornithologists were actually medical physicians. And they did both botany and zoology. They didn't sort of, they knew they were separate, but they were interested in both, just like Audubon followed the birds with the quadrupeds. And the 19th century, of course, late 18th century, after the Enlightenment, saw really the golden age of science and the discovery of all these things and the beginning of real taxonomic rigor in terms of naming the birds, and certainly the birds of America, which continues today. I mean, look at how DNA analysis is changing the names of birds all the time. I mean, look at the Orioles, and things go back and forth. You have to keep track.
There are no more tanagers.
I know. Isn't it awful? Isn't it awful? I mean, you really, every minute there's a change. And what are we gonna do if they really follow through? A lot of ornithologists have protested the American Ornithological Society of changing all the names and taking the honorifics out. What are we going to do? You don't have any descriptive terms left for things.
We'll number them.
By what? By Audubon's plates? No. I mean, how do you do that?
Darts at the wall. This is
I know. Darts to the wall. But then it'll be so confusing.
I'm confused now. So
I know.
It's not going to be that much different, but
apparently sharp-shinned and Coopers are not accipiters anymore.
Right.
They're accipitrine, but they're not accipiters.
Are there any? Oh, I'm sorry. Are there any specific museums or besides the ones we think of where we could see some of Audubon's original paintings that are maybe a little out of the way or that we wouldn't think of that would be worth a visit?
Okay, not the birds of America, but Harvard has wonderful early birds, both at the Museum of Comparative Zoology. They have some, and Houghton Library. And Houghton Library, all you have to do is make an appointment and they'll bring them out. I mean, you have to write ahead. And they are the early birds, but they are really definite. And they also have mammals, because he did mammals hung by a string and also mammals on the ground. And they're scattered around. Princeton has a number of early birds, but they're all basically early. There are also copies by Kidd. He hired Kidd, a young Scottish artist, to copy about 100 of the Havel plates from his watercolors in oil that he sold to help finance the birds, and they're scattered around.
Okay,
And sorry. Yeah.
I think it was in the New York Historic Society that I saw quite a few Audubon birds.
Did you see the complete flock, the aviary that I did? where I showed you a shot of it with the turquoise. We had 3 years. We showed all 474.
Okay, that
You
I
see
didn't.
that? No?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, I
And there's
saw,
an Audubon gallery. Yes.
Yes.
and now you have the Audubon route.
Yes, the Audubon gallery, which it goes plate by plate with comparative material and has the bird calls from Cornell Lab of Ornithology, which I think is so important to be able to hear the birds, as you know. But they're scattered, and I've actually thought of doing a book just for people's reference of some of the scattered ones. I have a list, but I don't think it needs to be done. They're interesting, but they don't have the kind of pull of these that he selected, actually. He actually burned early on. He burned lots of his early bird watercolors, unfortunately, because they just didn't live up to what he wanted. And you know the old story, the great one. There's a Japanese print much later, because the Japanese really admired Audubon. There's a Japanese print that shows him as an Asian man opening a box, because when he went on one of his rambles, he had he said 1,000 inhabitants of the air, huge hundreds of watercolors in this box, in this trunk. When he went on his rambles to draw the birds early on, he came back and Norway rats had made a nest in it and shredded all the watercolors.
Oh,
Isn't that awful?
Yeah.
I mean, terrible. And several times he did lose. He left them when the riverboat departed. He left a box of his watercolors on the landing, but they found their way back to him in New Orleans. There are all these great sort of frontier stories.
Wow.
But yeah.
Well, one quick tip: if anyone wants to visit the New York Historical Society, they could go for free by just visiting the Montclair Public Library, and you could get up to 6 passes.
Wow.
Yeah,
Really?
it's really neat. A lot of libraries are like that. Not only do they take out books, but you could take out museum passes.
I love that.
Oh.
Thank you so much. That's fabulous. That's
Yeah, it's
really,
like,
really great.
yeah, it's a good thing.
So you do really good work. 105. Who founded you?
Who founded the Montclair Bird Club?
Yeah. Yeah.
I
I should have done my homework.
I have it written somewhere. Donna, do you know?
Well, there were a handful of the original members.
Were they women?
Half and half, actually, when I
Good.
think some of the people, yeah.
Yeah, like the Massachusetts Audubon Society, which was really early. It was mainly women, and women were actually behind the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. I mean, we had, George Bird Grinnell in there, but women who were activists all over the Northeast, especially, were the people who were really behind that. So that's really good to know.
If you go to our website back and look at the Broadwings for the 100th anniversary, we did print a lot of the historical information.
Oh, good. I'll do that. That's great. So you must be very proud. And I like the fact you're trying to get younger birders on board.
It's our future.
Yeah, exactly. So can you do something like have a young birders special bird walk or something?
Well, Evan's very active with the bird club at the local high school, and
yeah, we're indoctrinating them.
Oh,
But some of the elementary schools do ask us. We do presentations for them.
Oh, good. Excellent. Excellent. And then what you have to do is get them on board, get them in a position of presenting.
We were offering small scholarships to high school students who would do a 20-minute lecture.
Oh, how great.
We only had 2 of those come through.
Yeah, yeah.
But we still make the offer.
I think that's great. And do guidance counselors help you on it, I hope?
No. And college professors haven't been very useful either.
Oh, really? Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, it's not their fault. It's
Yeah.
getting the students interested in doing it, which apparently isn't easy. We have a few, and we've tried to give them some sort of compensation for what they're doing. So hopefully it'll continue.
And hopefully the incentive will come from the birds themselves eventually.
You
that's all
pay
they
them
know.
now and then they get interested.
Yeah, exactly. The hook. That's great.
Roberta, excuse me, did Audubon have any pet birds?
He did, in fact. And oh, you've got me on another topic. He had many pet birds. And in fact, I don't know where to start. But let me take, for example, he and Lucy had pet wood ducks, and they actually made nest boxes for them. He wanted to propagate them. So he made nest boxes because they didn't always have nice logs like we saw in the wood duck watercolor. He also had this pet. He had many pet raptors over the years, some that would come in every night and actually enter his study and stay there. We also had that Nero, his pet sparrowhawk, when he was in the Peary Plantation, Oakley. And then the house wren that I showed you, the male that was grabbing the spider, that is actually a bird that came in to see him in his study every day. And he said, okay, I'm taking advantage of this. He grabbed the bird and he held it and he drew it. Okay. And he drew it while holding it. The bird was struggling. And then he's got this sort of naive, he let it go afterwards. And he has this naive statement saying to Lucy, and I don't know why it never came back. So it wasn't really a pet, but yes, he always kept pet birds. He always kept animals. And when he moved, he finally had, he's peripatetic for most of his life, often rambles. He lived out of his rucksack, and he always had his fiddle, he always had his flageolet, he always had his La Fontaine and his Churton for taxonomy, and then he had whatever he did for his position board. But what was I going to say? Where was I going with this?
I don't know, but I'm so glad to hear you said that he let birds go, because I was under the impression that he did taxiderm them so that they would be still enough for him.
He did some of them, but not for himself. In fact, he earned money and he learned about birds, which is one reason why he probably was able to do them so full of life too. When he had no money and he was saving up to marry Lucy, he came to New York and he worked in his Lucy's uncle's counting house, an import business. And he worked at Columbia with Mitchell, Latham Mitchell, who was a U.S. Senator, and he was also a physician, and he was also a professor of zoology at Columbia. He worked stuffing birds for Mitchell, and that's how he learned about them. And that's also probably one reason why he got dementia, because he was poisoned by the arsenic over time. I mean, that had its trait. But as he got older, he hated killing. And then when they went to Labrador, all the youth that were with him did the killing. He didn't like to do it. I mean, and if you read the last chapter of the book, you can see he's slowly beginning to see he just can't do it anymore. And his first, you don't realize how many birds there were. In 1821, his first inclination as George Grinnell said, George Bird Grinnell, aptly named Bird Grinnell, he talked about the inexhaustibility of the bird population. In 1821, he sees all these golden plovers, hundreds of thousands of them migrating. And there are people who killed thousands, 10,000 birds themselves, just their guns all day long. And that's the first time. And he is so sickened by it. He goes on and on and on about it. He did not believe in wanton destruction. He did earn his money sometimes. He earned some of his money on the flatboat in 1820-21 going down the Mississippi, shooting birds for their food. He earned his keep going down doing this, because remember, there were no Whole Foods those days. People hunted. But when he finally settled down and bought Minnie's land in 1841-42, built it in the Upper West Side, it was a wild land. It was wild, and there was this one house, and later his sons built houses next to it. But they had a menagerie. They had all kinds of wild birds. They had deer. They had elk. They had everything wandering around there, and these were their pets. They were semi-domestic. He also had domesticated ones. He had lots of dogs, lots of horses, lots of cats. He had 2 Angora cats that were stolen from him on his way back from Paris when he was in. I mean, I could tell you so many stories. He loved animals. He was just a magnet for animals. He celebrated them. He really, but it was a different day and age than it is today. I have to tell you this. There is a show on at the New York Historical Society where you can see 2 Audubon watercolors that are up now. It's called Pets in the City. It's my exhibition, and it traces the relation between animals and humans in the city from 1630 to the present day. And it shows the interaction of animals and with the domestication of animals from the wilderness all the way through the urbanization and to today. So, and there are 2 Audubon watercolors in it, the Carolina parakeets and the Florida scrub jays. And by the way, the Florida scrub jays, and this is really interesting. The most popular pet by 1866 was a songbird. It had more pages, 5 times the number of pages that dogs had in the bird called Household Pets, published in 1866. Everybody wanted songbirds because they miss nature. And it was before the introduction of canaries full scale, which became the most famous parlor bird. People imported mockingbirds, Carolina parakeets. We actually have a picture of a Carolina parakeet as a pet. Philip Hone, the mayor of New York, thought the northern mockingbird was the best songbird because they wanted to hear nature. So they were cage birds, and they were imported and sold in markets all over New York, and the same was true with New Jersey. I mean, they were a household pet, the most popular household pet. The gramophone, with its invention in 1877, also put a cap on that, as did the importation of canaries from the Harz Mountain region of Germany. So that's a fun fact for everybody.
Wow.
So much. But there are lots of birds if you're interested in the show about pets.
I wonder if Bernard Gatz's pet squirrel is in that.
There is a pet squirrel, a Beekman pet squirrel. But there are pet squirrels. Someone asked me, I've had every single pet except an iguana and a tiger in that show, including a pet squirrel, because we had 2 baby squirrels that came down our chimney. Only one lived. In colonial times, pet squirrels were very popular, and there are 4 paintings by John Singleton Copley of pet squirrels. When they're caught in the nest or they're youthful, they're very tame, and you can domesticate them. One of Copley's has a leash on it, a chain.
Wow. That was terrific.
I knew a pet squirrel for
Really?
whole 10 years of life. Yeah, it was owned by a cop, so nobody got after him for having it.
Was it in the city?
It was just out of the city. Yeah.
Oh, really? Wow.
It was a city cop.
Yeah, exactly.
He lived with them for 10 years before he died of cancer, actually.
Really? So a natural death, yeah. What did they feed him? Did they feed him acorns? Or?
Every imaginable nut that you can think of. He was a totally spoiled pet squirrel.
Well, one of my squirrels, only one of the 2 lived, is still around. And he's lost part of his tail. So he has only, I'd say, 3 inches of a tail, which is how I can identify him. He was a kind of runt. His body grew, but not his tail. Isn't that weird?
No. If anybody wants to Google a story I once did, it was on an attack squirrel this guy once had named D's Nuts. After the meeting, Google, or I could put it in the chat actually, the attack squirrel, he was an attack squirrel who was there he was a drug dealer, and the squirrel's name was D's Nuts.
Wow. Great animal stories.
Evan, is it on YouTube?
I'll put it in the chat right now. I'll find it in a second. You could. I'll send you the link. I'll put that.
That's great.
It's pretty funny.
Okay, love to see it. Thanks.
All right.
So I hope to hear from any of you who want to know more or want to be sent more. That'd be great.
Thank you very much.
Roberta,
Yeah,
you're
that was
wonderful.
Thank you. You're delightful. And I wish I could go on a bird walk with you.
Yeah,
You can.
you can.
I can. Okay.
I'm actually
I'll keep that in mind. I'll look on your website.
Good.
That would be a delight.
So last reminder, there is a virtual bird walk a week from tomorrow. And the theme is, it's cold outside. So you get to interpret that any way you'd like. And since we've had a little recent snow, I assume there'll be some recent pictures as well.
Thank you for the reminder, Sandy. And then we'll see some of you on the walks and some on the for the February program. Check your weekly announcements to see who our speaker's going to be.
You're a great flock. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Best of
Thank
luck.
you, Roberta. Thanks.
See you
That's
again.
great.
Bye.
I think we're good. Evan, I think we're all done.
Yeah, let me hit stop record. Hold on a second. And I'll send out my D's nuts to whoever's interested.
Who wouldn't be?
I'll put it in the